In the most exclusive fine dining restaurant of Midtown, where the clink of silverware on porcelain is treated like a symphony of etiquette, silence is something you pay for. No one raises their voice. No one disturbs the atmosphere soaked in French wine and baccarat chandeliers. Unless you're a guest. Amira Fields, 28. Black wore a cream-white server's uniform, buttoned all the way up to her collar. Her hair was pinned into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. She walked toward table 9, balancing a silver tray with a perfectly still glass of water. Each step was in rhythm, measured quiet, as if her body had memorized the breath of the velvet carpet beneath her. Table 9 belonged to a VIP, Douglas Whitmore, executive director of an international financial firm, recently relocated from New York. He sat alone, gray tailored suit, silk sea blue tie, Italian leather shoes without a speck of dust. Before him, a thick portfolio. Black leather-bound pages printed on textured stock, French titles underlined with corporate urgency. As Amira placed the water down, her eyes drifted briefly, instinctively across the first line of text. It wasn't curiosity. It was muscle memory. And that was when he looked up. Wait a second. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us. Were you reading that? His voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the room just enough to be heard. Amira froze, flustered. No, sir. I was just... If you're so smart, then translate it. The silence spread like a ripple, like someone had drawn the curtain open and let the cold light in. A few guests turned. An older man at the next table gave a soft chuckle, entertained by the sudden shift. A woman whispered, "God, who does she think she is?" Another muttered, "Maybe she thinks she's headed for law school." Amira stood still. Her eyes dropped from the French on the page to the edge of the table, then slowly rose to meet the man staring back. Eyes like sharpened pencil tips, lips curled in a smirk that didn't bother hiding its disdain. Before she could speak, the front-of-house manager James Colby rushed out from behind the bar, face tight, like he'd just spotted smoke near the velvet curtains. "Is there an issue, Mr. Whitmore?" he asked quickly, his eyes flicking to Amira with a warning baked in. Douglas leaned back in his chair, casually tapping the leather folder. "Nothing serious, just that your employee here seems more interested in my internal financial documents than in doing her job." James turned to Amira, his voice low and hammer sharp. "What were you doing? How many times have I said not to look at the guests' papers? I don't want excuses. If you're still standing here 5 seconds from now without an apology and heading back behind the bar, don't bother showing up tomorrow. People like you, black difficult, always bring trouble." Amira swallowed hard, her hands clenched behind her back. She could feel the stare's hundreds of invisible pins pricking the skin on her neck. A long silence. She didn't move. She didn't apologize. Instead, she leaned in ever so slightly, eyes scanning the documents still open on the table. She read line by line, commercial French budget breakdowns, investment terms. Her hands stayed at her sides, but her lips parted not with fear, but with quiet resolve. And in those deep brown eyes, something began to spark, something she had learned year after year to hide. Amira remained still. She didn't look up, didn't look down. The tight twist in her stomach wasn't from hunger. It was a different kind of pain humiliation. The whispers crawled around her like gnats. No shame at all thinks she's some forgotten Harvard genius. A waitress peeking at financial documents typical of black folks trying to act smart. James Colby, the manager, turned back to her. He'd let go of his reservation ledger, but not the scorn in his voice. "You think this is night school?" The guest asks a question, and you just stand there mute. "Best get out of my sight before I write up your termination tonight." Still, Amira said nothing. Her mind spun partly from hunger she hadn't eaten in over 9 hours, save for a stale piece of bread, partly from fatigue. She'd just finished a shift at the bookstore at 3 p.m., then ran here to make the evening shift. She was working 2 jobs over 60 hours a week to pay for her younger brother's medical bills. Derek Dubois, 16, lying in a cardiac care unit. The surgery. At least $30,000. Insurance only covered a fraction. Once she believed things would turn out differently. She graduated with honors from Georgetown, top of her class, in linguistics and international economics. She'd received internship offers from top-tier firms until it all collapsed because of one right decision that inconvenienced the wrong people. She had thought of quitting more than once. But every time she saw Derek's pale, tired face, she whispered to herself, "I can't quit. I won't." But the murmurs from nearby tables kept needling her. Shameless. Bet she squinted at those papers just to show off she can read. Girls like that rarely finish high school. You can tell. Looks like she escaped a shelter. A woman in designer glasses exhaled through her teeth. "If it were my firm, she'd be fired on the spot. Who lets staff peek at confidential documents?" Amira gripped the edge of her tray, tighter fingernails digging into her palm. James Colby still loomed beside her, like a shadow that had learned to talk. His tone softened just enough to sound like a favor, but it wasn't. "Fields, I'm really trying not to let this ruin your schedule. But if you keep upsetting our guests like this, maybe it's time to rethink your career path. Understood?" She nodded, lips pressed shut, but her eyes never left table 9. Douglas Whitmore, the white executive, was still lounging there, tapping 2 fingers against the table. Face relaxed, like he'd just finished a well-crafted play. Then, tilting his head, he spoke again, softer this time, but sharper. "Can you translate it or not?" "Go ahead. Or am I just expecting too much from a black woman who only needs to remember table numbers?" The words felt like a sentence already stamped. No raised voice, no theatrics, just a cruel truth dressed up as a joke. In a room where no one would defend her, Amira didn't respond. But she didn't walk away either, her gaze once shaken, now sharpened. She stared at the document, the one she was never supposed to touch. But in her mind, the French business terms, contract structures, financial risk sections, all of it began to resurface. She no longer heard the voices around her, no longer noticed the forks tapping on plates. There was only one thing left. If she walked away now, there would be no next chance to prove she wasn't what they called her, and she knew it was either bowing her head or rise and speak. She kept her eyes fixed on the document. She didn't blink, her lips were pressed tight, but her right hand rose steady as glass. "Let me see it." Her voice wasn't loud, wasn't cold, but it landed like a stake driven into the earth. Douglas Whitmore raised an eyebrow. A hint of amusement curled at his lips, like a man indulging a curious trick. "Oh, go ahead then." He slid the folder toward her with 2 fingers, the way one might push a bill across the table to someone clearly unable to pay it. James Colby froze, about to intervene, but stayed quiet. Nearby tables fell silent, no one even breathed too loud. She opened the folder, turned to the 3rd page. Her eyes swept over the bolded French business terms, financial footnotes, quarterly cash flow charts. Then, with flawless pronunciation, she began to read aloud in fluent French 12-month cash flow projection for regional operations in Latin America. If demand dips in Q2, the break-even threshold will fall by 8.5%, threatening net profit margins for distribution units. She read smoothly, no pauses, no stumbles, no missed terms. Each word landed clean and sharp like someone who had once lived in Lyon, not just learned from books. A server poked his head out from the kitchen. A couple paused mid-dessert, their spoons hovering. James Colby stared like he'd just seen a cat recite the Constitution. She lifted her head. She didn't smile. She just continued fingertip gliding across the numbers. This budget detail has a discrepancy. Q3 assumes raw material costs will rise by 3%, but the supply chart below maintains a flat rate. If that assumption holds, the July reserve allocation is under by nearly $700,000. Douglas's brow furrowed. She gently closed the folder quietly, cleanly, like shutting a door that had been left open far too long. My name isn't Amira Fields. It's the name I use here. My real name is Chloe Dubois, she said, eyes locked on Douglas. Last year I was a translator and financial analyst for this company. I uncovered inconsistencies in an internal budget appendix. Beside her, James coughed. Douglas said nothing, but Chloe wasn't done. Her tone remained steady, like reciting a sworn statement. My direct manager didn't want to escalate it, said I was too principled, too naive. Then he told me to resign, said it would protect the company's image. Her eyes gleamed, not with tears, but a sorrow long buried. Weeks later, he submitted the revised appendix to senior leadership labeled as Proactive Internal Audit and got promoted. She stared directly into Douglas's eyes. And me scrubbed from the company directory. No calls returned. No thank you. No severance. Just a templated termination letter sent to my personal inbox. No way, someone whispered. A diner. Possibly one who had laughed at her just minutes ago. Douglas slowly folded his hands, his expression no longer smug. Now it held something else. Skepticism. Confusion. And maybe respect. But he said nothing, and Chloe still wasn't finished. I know no one believes this. A black girl in a restaurant claiming she worked at a multinational firm sounds made up. Her voice quivered not from fear, but from the pounding in her chest. But I don't need you to believe what I used to be. I just need you to see who I am. Then she turned to Douglas, and for the first time her voice cracked just slightly. Where did you get this file? This isn't public, it's internal. Douglas narrowed his eyes. I received it this morning from the Regional Audit Division. Prep material for tomorrow's executive meeting. Chloe tilted her head slightly. Strange. I reviewed nearly every budget report this company produced for 3 years. Attended dozens of meetings. But I've never seen you there. You sure you didn't get that file from someone who used to handle it? Douglas hesitated. His eyes shifted now, focused. Now serious. As if he were re-evaluating everything he thought he knew about the woman standing before him. But before he could reply, she let out a quiet, tired laugh. Never mind. You're all the same. She took a step back. Her voice, though calm, was fraying at the edges. White men with seats they were born into, with the power to be wrong, to take credit for other people's work and call it excellence. James swallowed. The other servers behind the counter stood frozen, stunned. The silence now felt different, less apathy, more shock. Still Douglas didn't say a word. And it was in that exact moment when she thought she'd said everything. When she felt certain she'd exposed the truth. When everything seemed clear as sunlight after storm. Douglas blinked. Not mockery, not anger, but hesitation. She didn't know. That this man wasn't like the ones who pushed her out. That he'd been looking for exactly these files. To investigate misconduct from the last executive. That she had just struck the match. and he might be the only one with the authority to burn down everything that had been buried. But she didn't know that. Not yet. Because in her eyes, she was still being dismissed. The restaurant remained thick with tension, but the silence had changed. It no longer felt cold. It felt like the moment before something broke, like air before rain, tinged with metal, stretched tight like a drum skin. Chloe stood still, arms relaxed at her sides, chin held high. Her eyes were bright. But behind that light was a weight, a fatigue from years of being forced to stay silent, to endure, to fold herself into spaces that were never meant for her. Douglas Whitmore looked at her, then slowly nodded. Not like a man rebutting, but like someone who'd finally stopped resisting the truth he'd just heard. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low, barely reaching those nearest the table. "I rushed to judgment, and I judged you by appearance." Chloe narrowed her eyes. That apology came too fast, too clean. She almost didn't believe her own ears. James Colby's eyes widened. He turned to Douglas in disbelief. "You're apologizing to her?" Douglas didn't even glance at him. His eyes stayed on the black woman in front of him. No longer a server, no longer a discarded employee, but someone who had just stood tall, in a room waiting for her to kneel. "I'm Douglas Whitmore," he continued, "recently appointed Chief Executive for the Eastern Division." A ripple of whispers spread through the room. People began setting down their glasses, leaning in, murmuring. "And the document you translated is part of an internal audit project I launched the day I arrived. I ordered a full review of the past 3 years' financial reports to uncover what I suspected were intentional oversights." She froze. Douglas gave a slow nod. "You didn't recognize me because I'm new, but thanks to you, I now know exactly what I've been looking for." He clapped twice, softly. A man in a charcoal suit stepped forward from the corner of the room. Douglas's assistant, in his hands, an open iPad. Douglas took it, tapped a few times, and turned the screen toward her. "This is last year's internal report. That digital signature belongs to—" She glanced down. It was her former manager. Douglas nodded again. "He was suspended last week, but we lacked hard proof. Until today." James Colby swallowed hard. Speechless, Douglas turned to him. "And you? As a manager, you stood by while your employee was mocked, humiliated. And rather than protecting her, you joined in. If I hadn't been here today, Ms. Dubois would have been buried again." James stammered. "I was just following house protocol." Douglas shook his head and turned away, then softer back to Chloe. "Ms. Dubois, I can't give you back the years that were stolen, but I can offer you something else." He reached into his pocket, took out a thick business card, and placed it on the table. "This is an invitation to return. As a senior financial analyst, on our regional audit team, I will personally oversee your reinstatement." Chloe was stunned. She didn't even know how to react. But Douglas continued. "Almost as a vow, we need people like you, not just for your knowledge, but for your honesty, your courage. Because in the end, justice doesn't show up on its own. It needs someone to call it by name." Applause broke out, not from the diners, but from the staff, the servers, the very people who had once stood silently as she was belittled. Now the first to stand and clap. 2 weeks later, the headlines came. From humiliated server to welcomed analyst. The rise of Chloe Dubois. Clips from the restaurant. recorded secretly, went viral, showing the black woman translating French, breaking down financial risks, standing tall in a room full of doubt. Within 1 week, Chloe received over 300 emails from black women around the country, waitresses, teachers, nurses, students. Meanwhile, her former boss was fired. After investigators uncovered 3 separate attempts to whitewash financial misconduct, James Colby was demoted, transferred to a satellite branch, and ordered to attend mandatory anti-discrimination training. Chloe took the new position. Her salary tripled. But more importantly, she now had the means to pay for Derek's heart surgery. The day Derek was discharged, she took him to a quiet park near home. He sat on a bench, still pale, but his eyes gleamed like a boy. "Who just climbed out of the pit? You don't have to work 2 jobs anymore, right?" Derek asked. Chloe smiled. "No, now I just have 1 job, being true to who I am." She looked up, toward the sky where sunlight pierced between glass towers. Her hand held his, a hand that had once trembled with exhaustion, once slammed on bills through tears, once been dismissed. That hand was bringing her brother back from the edge of life. One late afternoon, Douglas stopped by Chloe's new office, unannounced. He knocked gently, smiling. "Do you remember what you asked me that day?" She stood and nodded. "Where did you get that document?" Douglas chuckled. "Right question. But that day, you got one thing wrong. What's that?" "You said, you're all the same." Chloe held his gaze, then smiled for the first time in months. "Yeah, I was wrong." Douglas nodded, extended his hand. "And I'm glad you had the courage to be wrong, instead of staying silent forever." Their hands met. No longer CEO and subordinate, not oppressor and survivor, just 2 people, one who had fallen, and one who had reached down, joining hands in a moment stripped of power but full of truth. Chloe didn't stand up to be applauded. She stood up, because if she didn't, no one would see that a black woman could understand finance, speak fluent French, and point out the flaws a whole system chose to ignore. She didn't need to be praised for her courage, because courage wasn't a choice. It was a necessity when truth was all she had left to lose. Chloe's story reminds us, the most brilliant minds aren't always sitting at the boardroom table. They might be carrying trays, mopping floors, enduring in silence. And sometimes, the fairest thing you can do is simply listen. Don't judge someone by their skin color, job title, or uniform. Let truth be the only voice that matters, because justice doesn't come from privilege. It comes from those who dare to stand tall in a world that keeps telling them to bow. The mansion gleamed under the morning sun. Marble floors catching light like mirrors. Down a long, endless hallway, a small figure crouched low, scrubbing the floor. Thin, bony shoulders jutting out beneath an oversized janitor's uniform. Aaliyah, a black girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old. Her dry, tangled curls were tied back behind her neck. One hand clutched a bucket, the other held a brush. Just then, Ronald Whitmore appeared, owner of the mansion, a white billionaire whose investment firm had branches around the globe. Tall, crisped gray suit, polished leather shoes, walking toward her down the crimson hallway. Aaliyah stepped into his path. "Sir," she said softly, lips trembling. "I saw her put something in your food." Ronald knew this girl. He was the one who allowed her to work part-time here. Or rather allowed her to follow her grandmother, the actual employee. Aaliyah swept floors, collected dirty towels, emptied trash, and dusted the low corners where grown-ups didn't bother to bend. 10-hour days. Traded for a few small bills her struggling family desperately needed. He was a decent man. So when the little girl blocked his way and spoke those vague words, he only frowned and asked, "Her?" "Yes. Your wife." Aaliyah took a step back, but didn't drop her gaze. A look that carried both fear and something else. Something urgent. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't sugar. Or salt. I saw her. A tiny bottle. She poured it into your tea. And your coffee. Silence fell over the hallway. A single drop of water slipped from her brush and hit the marble like the heartbeat of a small body echoing across the vast hall. Ronald stood still, eyes locked on the child. A child. A janitor. A black girl. And that accusation aimed at his wife, Charlotte Whitmore. A woman of high status. White with an air of mystery and ice. For a moment he said nothing. He just looked at Aaliyah. Something in her eyes made him hesitate. There was a kind of honesty in them. Raw. Unpolished. Impossible to fake. A kind of bravery that only exists in those too young to know how to lie. But that moment lasted only seconds. From the staircase above, the sharp clack of heels echoed. Measured. Confident. Like the sound of a gavel. Oh, what did I just hear? Aaliyah flinched. Charlotte Whitmore stood there. Beige silk dress hugging her slender figure. Lips blood red, platinum hair flawless like porcelain. Her eyes didn't need to look to make the air grow colder. She walked down the steps slowly, each movement slicing the air like a blade. "This filthy little black thing," she said with a venomous calm. "What did she just say to you, Ronald?" Ronald turned to his wife, answering carefully. "She just said, that I poisoned your food," Charlotte cut in. "Marvelous. A cheap little drama from the bottom feeders." She stopped in front of Aaliyah, leaned close, not to whisper but to hiss. "Who do you think you are? You little black rat. You think you get to meddle in this household's affairs?" Aaliyah looked down, clutching her uniform tight. Her eyes dropped to Charlotte's heels, sharp gleaming like they could pierce flesh. "What is it you want? A reward for your made-up tale? Or is it just that low blood instinct always jealous of the white woman? You're nothing but a filthy floor girl. You don't speak to my husband. Got that?" Her voice tore through the hallway like glass. Aaliyah trembled like a leaf in a storm. But her eyes, they held no lie, only a dimming light. Ronald watched. And then he spoke again. "Charlotte, that's enough. Enough!" she snapped, turning to him in disbelief. "You're defending her, no," he said calmly. "I just think she's a child, and you believe a floor girl over your own wife?" He didn't answer right away. He kept looking at Aaliyah, as if trying to memorize her face, and something deep in his eyes shifted. A child, a whisper. A seed of truth had just been planted. Aaliyah knew she wasn't like other kids. While children her age carried backpacks to school, she carried buckets and rags alongside her frail grandmother, scrubbing the homes of the wealthy from sunrise to dusk, just to earn enough for her grandparents to afford treatment for the very illness she bore. Bone marrow failure. It made her dizzy. Her hands and feet cold like ice. Sometimes she had to lean against walls just to stay upright. But Aaliyah never complained. Her grandmother had taught her one thing. We're poor, but we don't get to be weak. The Whitmore estate was the first place she ever saw a floor so polished it reflected her crouched figure back at her. And the first place she truly felt afraid. After the day she spoke up. After daring to say she saw something added to the master's food. Her world flipped upside down. Charlotte didn't fire her outright. But the punishment began in silence, creeping into every small moment. Her lunch, an old container placed quietly on a folding table beside the laundry room, was often accidentally dumped into the trash. The stench of filthy poor kids makes me sick. Charlotte would sneer as she tossed the food away, her eyes flat and cold, as if throwing out garbage, not a sick child's only meal. Her cleaning tools began to vanish. Brushes disappeared. The bucket leaked from a tiny puncture. Her gloves were sliced at the bottom. So each time she scrubbed toilets, foul water soaked her cracked palms. "Did I do something wrong?" Grandma Aaliyah once asked. Eyes rimmed red. "No, baby." Her grandmother sighed. "Bad people don't need a reason to hate you." Still, Aaliyah endured, because she knew she told the truth. She had seen Charlotte tip something clear and strange into Ronald's coffee. But no one believes a little black janitor girl. The more she spoke, the more they saw her as rude, lying, mouthy child, they'd say. No one believed her. Except, maybe Ronald. Every afternoon, when sunlight poured through the library windows, he would call out, "Aaliyah, are you tired? Come read with me for a bit." The library felt like another world. Wooden walls, red velvet chairs, the smell of old books and peppermint tea. Aaliyah would curl into a corner chair, flipping through children's books in silence. Ronald often sat quietly sipping tea. Now and then he'd ask, "Have you read Charlotte's Web? Or maybe The Little Prince?" And for the first time, Aaliyah felt like a real child. Once, he even lifted her up so she could reach the shelf herself, something no one had ever done for her, something she'd never dared to imagine. Charlotte didn't hide her contempt. "You're spoiling her, Ronald," she snapped one day, finding them in the library. "I don't want that dirty little thing in our private space." "She hasn't done anything wrong," he said calmly. "She's just reading." "You're treating a floor-scrubbing brat like she's some literary prodigy." Her eyes were ice. Ronald said nothing, just pushed the book toward Aaliyah. "Keep reading. Don't mind her." Then one night, Aaliyah woke up coughing. She tiptoed out of the storage room where she and her grandmother slept in the basement, heading through the dark hallway for water. Passing the master bedroom, she saw light peeking through the door. She stopped. Inside, Charlotte stood before a mirror, hair loose, face bare. Under the yellow light, her skin no longer looked white. It had turned patchy grayish brown, rough with spots creeping around her neck and forehead. She was injecting something into her arm, a pearlescent liquid from a tiny vial. Aaliyah held her breath. She didn't fully understand, but something in her gut told her. It wasn't medicine. It was something meant to change her. The next morning, Aaliyah couldn't keep it in anymore. "Sir," she whispered to Ronald in the library. "I saw her inject something. Her skin went dark, then light again." Ronald frowned. "Are you sure?" Aaliyah nodded. He said nothing more. Only picked up his phone and ordered his assistant to collect any used vials from Charlotte's private bathroom. 3 days later, he sat across from Aaliyah. His face looked like it had weathered a storm. "You were right." He set an empty vial on the table, its label nearly scraped off. Independent lab results confirmed it was a synthetic serum chemically designed to alter melanin, the pigment in human skin. "Charlotte may not have always been white," he said, as if struggling to believe his own words. She was a black woman. Aaliyah's eyes widened. He explained. 12 years ago, I had a one-night stand with a black woman whose name I barely remembered. I left the next morning without a word. Years later, she came back as Charlotte. He gave a bitter laugh. Everything about her had changed. Pale skin, impeccable accent. I thought it was fate. Turns out his voice dropped. She didn't marry me out of love. She came back to destroy me for abandoning her that night. He clenched his fists, then opened them. Another lab result. From the coffee Aaliyah had once warned him about. Mercury. What Aaliyah gasped. In simple terms, poison. In tiny doses it builds in the body, slowly damages the nervous system. After a few years' death. Quiet and slow. Do you understand? He paused, then placed a hand on her shoulder. Not like a billionaire to a housemaid's granddaughter, but like someone deeply grateful. You saved me. If you hadn't said something that day, I might have never found out. Aaliyah's eyes sparkled. I did good, didn't I? Ronald didn't hesitate. He hugged her. Well done, Aaliyah. That afternoon, the Whitmore estate trembled. Charlotte's clothes, gowns, heels, cosmetics, and jewelry were packed into boxes and dumped outside the gate. A black car pulled up. Charlotte stepped out from the spa blonde curls, bouncing lips blood red. Ronald stood on the front steps, phone in hand. What the hell are you doing? She shrieked. Pack up your past and get out of my house, he said, voice cold as steel. She stared, unable to comprehend. He turned his back. I can't believe you. A black woman in saint's clothing, a fraud. Get out before I have you removed, his words sliced like a blade. Charlotte stood frozen. No lipstick could cover the cracks forming behind her eyes. Inside the glass door, Aaliyah watched her heart heavy as stone, because she didn't know. Was this the end, or just the beginning of a much greater storm? After Charlotte left the mansion, it felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted. No more sharp clicking heels on marble floors, no more suffocating perfume that clawed at the throat whenever she passed. The staff breathed easier. Even the hallways seemed warmer, and for Aaliyah, it was the first time in months the place didn't feel like a gilded cage. Ronald changed, too. He smiled more. Spoke with a gentler tone. Some afternoons he let Aaliyah end her shift early and invited her to the library, a sun-drenched room that smelled of aged wood and quiet. You like reading, don't you? He asked, resting a hand on the back of a leather chair. Aaliyah nodded. He offered her a velvet armchair and brought her a mug of warm milk, vanilla-scented imported. Thank you. You're so kind, she murmured, fingers wrapped around the mug. You deserve it, Ronald replied, his voice soft. You helped me dodge something terrible. I owe you more than I can say. She smiled, really smiled for the first time in weeks. Do you want a present? He asked suddenly, his tone still warm but slower than before. A present, she blinked. Yes, something special. Upstairs, I think you'll like it. He stood, gestured lightly. Aaliyah watched him leave the room, then slowly got to her feet. The staircase curved upward like a spine steps polished to a mirror-black sheen. She followed her steps, quiet, cautious. The master bedroom opened wide. Luxurious cold silk sheets, crystal chandeliers, everything too neat, too still. Go on, Ronald said. It's in the cabinet. Aaliyah approached the low dresser. Where, sir, I don't see. Click. The door shut behind her, locked. The air changed. Ronald was no longer distant. He stepped closer. His eyes no longer matched the man who once handed her storybooks and warm milk. Aaliyah backed away. What's wrong, sir? He didn't answer. You're special, he said quietly. Brave kind. I care about you, don't be afraid. Aaliyah's breath hitched. Her small frame trembled. Please, I want to go back downstairs, she whispered, her body screaming to get away. But Ronald stood in her path. Then, just as her panic began to overwhelm her, the door slammed open. Get away from her, you sick bastard! Charlotte, or rather the woman once known as Charlotte. No platinum hair, no porcelain skin. Now she stood barefaced, skin rich, and dark curls wrapped in cloth fury, blazing in her eyes like lightning. Ronald spun. You dare come back? I came to see with my own eyes. You haven't changed. You're still the monster I remember. Aaliyah stumbled toward the exit but collapsed midway. Her breathing became shallow. Her face turned ghostly pale. Coughs racked her body, red streaks spotting her lips. Charlotte rushed to her side. My baby, she whispered without thinking. Ronald froze. What Aaliyah passed out. In the hospital, IVs snaked into her arms as doctors muttered grim warnings. Severe immune failure. We need a blood donor immediately or... Charlotte sat beside the bed, her hand clutching Aaliyah's. Her eyes were red but dry. Ronald lingered by the doorway. Who do you think you are barging back into my life? He barked, though his voice trembled. She turned voice like fire. I'm the girl you used to brag about, the one you conquered for a night. You were willing. I didn't force you. Willing. She laughed, bitter and brittle. I was 18, a kitchen hand. I didn't even know how to spell no. You had money power, that look in your eyes. You poured me wine. You called it romance. One night for you. A ruined life for me. She stepped closer. I got pregnant. My family disowned me. Friends vanished. Laughed at for being a black girl pregnant, unmarried. I nearly ended it all. Ronald shrank back. But I didn't. I met a madman. A brilliant pharmacist. He gave me a serum. Made me white. Gave me a new name. I returned as Charlotte, your perfect wife. And you poisoned me, Ronald growled. Yes, drop by drop, so you could rot as I had. Weak, afraid, dying slowly. And the girl... He choked. Charlotte looked at Aaliyah. Pain flickered in her eyes. She's the child I left behind to come after you. She's your daughter. Your own daughter. And look what you nearly did to her. Ronald stood stunned, jaw slack. I'll save her, Charlotte said firmly. With my blood if I have to. But you will never touch her again. Ronald lowered his head. The mask of goodness shattered. All the kindness he'd shown. Just a predator in disguise. In the sterile glow of the hospital room, the black woman held her daughter's limp hand. Machines beeped steadily. Each sound a reminder of what hatred costs. I'm sorry, baby, she whispered. Outside, Ronald passed by a mirror. Still in his fine suit, still polished, but the man inside it was hollow, rotting, already gone. In the hospital room, Aaliyah lay unconscious on the white bed, her face pale as paper. An IV line ran into her fragile arm, her pulse barely a thread beneath the skin. Beside her sat a black woman. No longer Charlotte Whitmore, just Lena. Stripped of her mask, she sat motionless, her face worn with sorrow. Her eyes caught somewhere between steel and shatter like a soul that had carried itself too far and finally collapsed. The door creaked open. A frail old woman entered. Hair white as frost, cane trembling in her hand. Behind her was a gaunt old man with hollow eyes. Aaliyah's grandparents. They stopped in their tracks when they saw the woman by the bed. Lena. The grandmother whispered after a stunned pause. It's me. Lena rose to her feet, voice unsteady. The daughter you gave up on. No one spoke for a moment. The old couple's eyes glistened. 10 years of silence cracked open. They remembered the day she came home. Pregnant, weeping, mocked by neighbors. And the day she left without looking back. "I wasn't brave enough to raise her," Lena said, head bowed. "I gave birth and left her at your door. Then I disappeared. I'm sorry. I hated my skin. I hated everything I was. I didn't want her to look like me. Didn't want any trace of the man who ruined me. I thought if I kept her, I'd never be able to carry out what I needed to do." She sank lower. "I was wrong. So wrong." Just then the doctor entered. "Urgent. Her blood type is extremely rare. We've exhausted our supply. Without a direct match from a relative, we could lose her." Lena didn't hesitate. "Take mine. I'm her mother." The transfusion lasted over 2 hours. When the final bag emptied, the first flicker of life returned. Aaliyah's fingers twitched. Her lips quivered. Then slowly her eyes opened. Cloudy. Weak. But alive. "I'm here," Lena whispered, gripping her daughter's hand. For the first time, tears slid down her cheeks. How are you?" she asked hoarsely. Aaliyah didn't speak. She only looked at her long, deep. Then the tears came. Not from fear, but from something else entirely. A strange sense of safety. That gaze somehow felt familiar. The next morning, Lena walked into the police station, a heavy suitcase in her hand. Inside documents, test results, recordings, journals, and a sealed vial of poison. "I wanted to destroy him myself," she told the inspector. "But my daughter deserves better. I want her to grow up in a different world, one I never had. Every record, every whispered confession from Ronald. The mercury analysis, the drug receipts, the legal name change. It was all there like a bomb she'd been building for a decade, waiting for the right moment to detonate." That afternoon, officers stormed the Whitmore estate. Ronald didn't resist. He let them cuff him in silence. No words, no struggle. The mask of the noble billionaire had finally fallen. The price of deception was truth. Raw, public, irreversible. News exploded like wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire Ronald Whitmore charged with child assault." Charlotte was never white. 10-year revenge plot exposed. 10-year-old girl uncovers horrors inside million-dollar mansion. Every outlet carried the story, but Lena didn't speak. She refused interviews, turned down every offer of sympathy. Instead, she sat by her daughter's side, reading to her page by page from old books she once stole moments with in the kitchen when no one was watching. 3 months later, at the federal courthouse, Ronald Whitmore was sentenced to 30 years in prison for sexual assault, poisoning, child endangerment, and defamation. Lena, once known as Charlotte, was cleared of charges. Her actions were deemed defensive, her case classified as a rare file, the reclaiming of dignity, the rebirth of a soul through fire. The day Aaliyah left the hospital, the sky was bright blue. Sparrows chirped on the white picket fence. "Ready to go home?" Lena asked. Aaliyah turned to her. "Do we have a home? Not yet." Lena smiled. "But we have each other." And hand in hand, they stepped beyond the iron gates of the mansion, once a palace of silence and pain, now just a crumbling backdrop to their past. Aaliyah's small feet moved beside her mother's different skin, different stories, but the same heartbeat. In a world where light is often dimmed by the veil of hypocrisy, sometimes justice is reignited by those who were once cast aside. This story doesn't just expose the rot hidden behind power and prestige. It traces the journey of a mother who once lost herself, but found the courage to return to save the child born into her darkest night. And above all, it reminds us justice doesn't only live in the courtroom. It lives in courage, in a child who dared to speak the truth, and in a mother who faced her past to begin again in the very skin she once tried to erase. The mansion stood like a sleeping castle in the quiet garden. Naomi Clark, a petite black woman in her 20s, had just started her new full-time housekeeping job there. Raised in an orphanage, she never imagined she'd walk through the gates of silk and power, that afternoon assigned to clean the third-floor library. For the first time, Naomi stepped into a room lined with books and dappled in golden light. As she dusted near a tall bookshelf, her hand froze mid-air. Hanging on the wall was an old photograph of a little black girl beaming in a field of grass. Naomi's heart stuttered. Her hand trembled. It was her 6 years old. She walked closer, fingertips brushing the edge of the frame, eyes widening in disbelief. She knew that face knew it, like the reflection she saw during those early years at the orphanage. The only photos she had were poor scans printed from missing person files. "That's me, Naomi," whispered voice, almost breaking. A soft cough broke the silence behind her. She turned. A white man stood at the doorway in his 50s, hair silver and trimmed jaw, square eyes, a deep gray blue like a winter lake. He wore a charcoal turtleneck under a long coat, a book in one hand. Gregory Van Alden, the master of the house. "You recognize someone?" he asked, voice low and calm like a cello's hum. Naomi didn't answer at first. Her gaze stayed fixed on the smiling child in the photo. "That's me." He stepped closer, slowly, looking down at the photo. Then he stopped drawing in a long breath, his eyes closing for a moment, fingers twitching. "All these years," he murmured, "I kept that photo here waiting for a sign." Naomi blinked. "What do you mean?" Gregory swallowed hard, his voice roughening. "The girl in the picture, she's my daughter. She disappeared when she was 6. Her mother died in a car crash." The vehicle flipped. "I only found my wife's body. Police said my daughter was likely swept away by the current near the crash site. I searched. I waited for anything." He paused, eyes searching hers. "And now here you are. You look just like her. Even the scar behind your left ear. Am I right?" Naomi stepped back, her hand instinctively reaching up behind her ear. Gregory stepped forward, gently, placing his hand on her shoulder, his voice trembling. "It's you, isn't it, my daughter?" She stood frozen. Naomi had never known who her parents were, but now this man, a billionaire, was telling her she was his long-lost child, that the photo wasn't a coincidence, that this moment wasn't a dream. It was memory come to life. Gregory dropped to his knees in front of her, too overwhelmed to remain standing. "My little girl, you've come home." Naomi couldn't speak. Her throat tightened like a fist. She didn't know what to believe, whether to cry or run. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, someone was calling her daughter. And in his eyes there was no pity, no pretending, only the ache of someone who had waited far too long. In the days that followed, Naomi's world flipped. No longer a maid, she became the lady of the house, the same house she once mopped floors in. Gourmet meals, designer clothes, a private doctor, a personal scheduler, even an etiquette tutor to help her adjust to her status. But Naomi didn't need lessons. All she ever wanted was to be called daughter at breakfast, to see Gregory smile as she read in the library, to feel his hand gently pat her head as they sat in the garden. She thought, maybe this is destiny. Maybe I've found my family. But Naomi didn't know that hidden inside Gregory's watch was a secret compartment. and that when that watch finally opened, it wouldn't just turn back time. It would unleash a past, long-buried one powerful enough to wash away everything she thought was finally hers. The DNA results were in. Naomi sat still in the silver-gray carpeted room, hands clasped, eyes dazed, like she was floating through a dream that wouldn't end. On the table lay a sealed envelope stamped in red confidential. Inside, at Gregory's request, were 3 separate DNA test results from 3 independent medical centers, all cross-verified to eliminate any doubt. Each result said the same thing. Naomi Clark, biological daughter of Gregory Van Alden. Gregory couldn't hide the emotion. He pulled her into his arms, shaking eyes glossy, as though a piece of his soul, lost for decades, had just come home. "Since the day I lost you," he whispered, voice hoarse. "I haven't lived a single day without searching. I thought I had nothing left to live for." And Naomi, who had once believed she was an unwanted child, heard for the first time the word father spoken, not with pity or obligation, but with raw, aching truth. From then on, Naomi's life changed not in some fairy tale kind of way, but in quiet, thoughtful shifts. She was fitted with dresses that complemented her small frame. Meals were prepared with care. Low-oil, iron-rich, immune-boosting. A personal nutritionist began visiting weekly to craft her meal plan. People said she looked like her mother, a black woman, once a little-known freelance artist, remembered only by a few. But her eyes had always held the soft sadness of early morning fog. Gregory rehung her portrait in the living room, sitting before it every morning before leaving for work. He brought Naomi to her mother's old studio, untouched for years. And Naomi sat before the easel, brushing her fingers over the hardened strokes of long-dried paint, feeling something stir in her chest she didn't know how to name. She had never had a family. Now she had a father, a home, and even memories. Borrowed, maybe, but still traces of a mother she had never known. One morning, as Naomi returned from the garden, she heard a strange noise upstairs. She rushed up to find Gregory slumped over the banister, clutching his chest, gasping, as though someone were squeezing the breath from him. "Dad," she screamed, running to catch him. "A heart attack." Thankfully, they got to him in time. For the first time, Naomi entered the private treatment wing reserved just for him. No staff had ever been inside. The room was stark white, lined with machines that beeped around his bed. She took his hand as he opened his eyes, weak, but smiling. "I'm okay." Just this old heart acting up again. The doctor didn't sugarcoat it. His heart was replaced almost 20 years ago. Even the best grafts only last that long. "We're at the limit," Naomi's voice cracked. "Is there anything at all that can save him?" Another transplant. But finding a second compatible heart is extremely unlikely, and with his history, Gregory waved the doctor off. "Don't talk like that in front of her. Enough." He turned to Naomi, gripping her hand tightly. "I'm not afraid of dying. The only thing I ever prayed for was to hold my daughter again before I go." Naomi hugged him. No hesitation this time. She had once lived like a weed growing in the cracks. Now she was the only hand this man had left to hold, and she swore she would do anything to keep him alive. Naomi began searching. With Gregory's resources, she contacted hospitals, partnered physicians, and organ donor advocacy groups. She drove for hours to speak to newly registered donors, persuading them to add heart to their donor list. She met with families of brain-dead accident victims, begging them to consider saving a life. But every time it ended the same. A heart. "No. I can't bear the thought of someone taking my child's heart. Sorry. We're not ready. We just can't let go yet. It's not about money. You have to understand. It just feels wrong." Naomi never blamed them. She understood. But each rejection brought her back to the hospital. Watching Gregory's frame grow thinner, his skin pale from lack of oxygen, and each time she felt smaller than before. "I can't lose him again," she whispered to the mirror. "I have to make this work." A week later, the doctor came with news. A car accident victim was being kept alive on machines. Brain dead. But the heart was viable. A match. But the family hadn't consented. Naomi all but fell to her knees. "Please give me the address. I need to speak with them. In person." The doctor hesitated, then finally agreed. Naomi drove herself. No chauffeur. No backup. That day the sky hung heavy with dark clouds, wind slicing through her coat like paper. She was headed to a small northern town where the potential donor was being kept. The highway gave way to a narrow forest road flanked by dense pine trees. And then, a sharp collision from the side. Her car was struck spinning across the road like a toy, then crash, head-on into the rear of a parked truck. The airbag exploded.